King Kong, the spider pit sequence that terrified even its creator. When King Kong roared into theaters in 1933, it changed everything. It wasn't just a spectacle, it was a revolution. Stop-motion animation, dramatic musical scoring, and sheer cinematic scale came together in a way the public had never seen before. But what audiences didn't see was one of the film's most harrowing moments. A deleted sequence so disturbing that even the filmmakers agreed it had to go. The scene in question became known as the Spider Pit sequence. In the final cut of the film, there's a moment when King Kong shakes a group of sailors off a log bridge, sending them plummeting into a deep ravine. In the theatrical version, they fall, and then the story quickly moves on. But originally, that fall was only the beginning. According to original storyboards and production notes, the sailors were supposed to land at the bottom of the ravine, injured, but alive, where they were then set upon by a swarm of monstrous creatures. Spiders, tentacled insects, and other prehistoric horrors were meant to crawl out of the darkness and descend upon them in gruesome fashion. The sequence was fully shot using Willis O'Brien's stop-motion animation and live-action compositing, an extremely time-consuming and expensive process in 1933. But when director Marion C. Cooper screened the scene for a test audience, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Accounts from the time suggest that audience members were visibly shaken, some even leaving the theater. The effect was too real, too claustrophobic, and too terrifying, especially for a Depression-era audience that had never seen such explicit on-screen peril. Cooper himself reportedly called the footage too intense and ordered it removed right before the film's final edit. Freaks, the ending so horrifying audiences ran from the theater. In 1932, MGM released one of the most controversial films in the studio's history and arguably in all of classic Hollywood, Freaks. Directed by Todd Browning, who had found success a year earlier with Dracula, the film was adapted from a short story called Spurs and set in a circus sideshow. But unlike most films of its time, Freaks didn't use makeup or special effects. Browning cast actual sideshow performers, individuals with physical disabilities and medical conditions, as his central characters. He intended it as a story of loyalty, betrayal, and the strength of marginalized communities. But the final cut was something far darker, and for many, far more disturbing. The original version of Freaks contained several scenes that no longer exist today, including a more graphic revenge sequence and a different, even more horrifying ending. When the film was first screened for test audiences, the reaction was instant and catastrophic. Reports from the time tell of audience members fainting, leaving the theater in distress, and demanding refunds. One woman even claimed the film caused a miscarriage and threatened to sue MGM. The studio, already shaken, ordered over 25 minutes of footage cut, including extended sequences of the sideshow performers crawling through the mud in a storm, brandishing knives, axes, and ropes in a shocking scene of vengeance against the film's villains. But the most infamous deletion was the original ending. In the final released version, we see the scheming trapeze artist Cleopatra turned into a grotesque human-duck hybrid, a mutilated creature now displayed in a sideshow cage. The film cuts away quickly, but early drafts and studio records confirm that the original scene showed the transformation in far more graphic detail, including makeup effects so disturbing they were deemed unacceptable even for pre-code audiences. MGM was horrified. The studio head, Irving Thalberg, demanded the film be re-edited immediately. The Big Sleep, scenes too suggestive for even the censors. By the mid-1940s, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall had become Hollywood's most smoldering on and off-screen couple. Their chemistry was effortless, their dialogue electric. So when Warner Brothers adapted Raymond Chandler's hard-boiled crime novel The Big Sleep for the screen, pairing Bogart as Philip Marlowe with Bacall as the enigmatic Vivian Rutledge, seemed like an instant win. But what happened behind the scenes is a masterclass in studio politics, censorship, and strategic erasure. The original cut of The Big Sleep was completed in 1945. It was moody, complex, and perhaps most surprisingly clearer in plot and character motivation than the version we now consider a classic. But when Bacall's previous film, Confidential Agent, received poor reviews, Warner Brothers got nervous. Executives feared she would lose her momentum, and they demanded that The Big Sleep be re-edited to maximize the chemistry between Bogart and Bacall, even if it meant reshaping the story entirely. But the real issue wasn't just romance, it was suggestion. The Production Code Administration, which strictly monitored moral content, took issue with several scenes that implied sexual relationships, drug use, and homosexuality, all taboo in 1940s cinema. One of the most controversial characters was Carol Lundgren, whose intense devotion to the murdered character Joe Brody carried a clear subtext in Chandler's novel. In the original cut, his scenes had a sinister intimacy that censors flagged as inappropriate innuendo. Likewise, the character of Carmen Sternwood, played by Martha Vickers, was originally portrayed as more overtly sexual, with a dangerous vulnerability that pushed the limits of what the code allowed. Rebecca, the ending Hollywood, wasn't allowed to show. When Alfred Hitchcock made his American debut with Rebecca, he entered Hollywood not with a scream, but with a whisper, one that echoed through every hallway of Manderley. Produced by David O. Selznick, the film was based on Daphne du Maurier's best-selling novel, a gothic tale of jealousy, manipulation, and psychological torment. But while the novel's ending was chilling, morally complex, and powerfully ambiguous, the film's ending was not. And the reason? The production code wouldn't allow it. In du Maurier's original text, the mystery unravels around Maxime de Winter, played in the film by Laurence Olivier, and the death of his first wife, Rebecca. In the novel, it's revealed that Maxime murdered Rebecca, shooting her in a moment of anger before attempting to cover it up as an accident. It's a stunning twist. The refined gentleman becomes something much darker, and the entire narrative shifts from romantic suspense to moral reckoning. But that version of Maxime's guilt never made it to the screen. Under the Hays Code, Hollywood's strict system of censorship at the time, no character was allowed to commit murder and go unpunished, especially not a romantic lead. Hitchcock and Selznick were forced to change the script, reworking Rebecca's death into an accident, a fall with Maxime merely covering it up, not causing it. The result? A completely different interpretation of the character. In the novel, Maxime is a killer. In the film, he becomes a man haunted by guilt, but not guilty of the worst crime. The entire psychological weight of the ending was diluted, softened to pass through the censors. What remained was still powerful. Hitchcock's mastery of suggestion, light, and shadow made Rebecca an enduring classic. Gilda, the dance too dangerous for the screen. In 1946, Rita Hayworth lit up the screen in Gilda not just as a character, but as a force of nature. With one toss of her hair and a single glove slipping from her hand, she redefined cinematic sensuality in the post-war era. But what most audiences don't know is that Gilda, as released, was not the film originally shot. Several scenes, including one pivotal and provocative dance, were altered or removed entirely before the public ever saw them. Directed by Charles Vidor, Gilda was marketed as a noir romance, but beneath its surface was a story of obsession, repression, and veiled eroticism. Hayworth played a woman caught between two men, her possessive husband Balin, and her embittered former lover Johnny. The tension between them wasn't just romantic, it was raw, dangerous, and bubbling just below the surface. The most famous scene in the film, Gilda's glove striptease to the tune of "Put the Blame on Mame," was already pushing the limits of what the production code allowed. Hayworth sang, swayed, and teased the camera, taking off just one glove while her eyes did most of the work. But even that tame-seeming act sparked controversy. Behind the scenes, the studio had shot a longer version of the number one that was more provocative, with additional gestures, camera angles, and emotional undertones. That version never made it past the censors. Psycho, the shower scene that almost didn't survive the censors. When Psycho was released in 1960, Alfred Hitchcock didn't just shock audiences, he changed cinema forever. The black and white psychological thriller defied narrative expectations, shattered the illusion of safety in film storytelling, and introduced a new kind of horror that didn't come from monsters, but from the man next door. But it was the shower scene, just 3 minutes long, with 70 camera setups and over 50 cuts, that nearly didn't make it to screen at all. Filmed with meticulous precision by Hitchcock and edited by George Tomasini, The sequence shows Janet Leigh's character, Marion Crane, brutally murdered in a motel shower. It doesn't actually show the knife piercing her skin, but it doesn't have to. The editing, the music, the flashes of light and shadow, and Leigh's silent scream created the most terrifying illusion in film history. But when Hitchcock submitted the scene to the Production Code Administration, the response was swift. The scene was too graphic. Reviewers objected to nudity, implied violence, and what they interpreted as a lingering view of Leigh's breasts, which, in reality, was never shown. The shower curtain's translucency, combined with tight editing and stark lighting, created the suggestion of exposure where none existed. Nevertheless, the censors demanded that the scene be trimmed or removed. Hitchcock, ever the master of manipulation, did something unusual. He waited a few days, made minor edits, and resubmitted the footage. This time, the censors passed it. According to legend, the second viewing took place after lunch, and the censors, perhaps less sharp-eyed the second time around, approved the very thing they had originally condemned. But even beyond the famous shower sequence, Psycho pushed against other boundaries. The film opened with a scene of a woman and man in bed together, both unmarried, a direct challenge to the Hays Code's long-standing rules. The Outlaw, the close-up that sparked a Hollywood firestorm. When producer and billionaire Howard Hughes set out to make The Outlaw in the early 1940s, he wasn't just trying to tell a Western. He was trying to challenge the very boundaries of what Hollywood would allow, and he knew exactly where to aim. The film starred Jane Russell, a relatively unknown actress at the time, who Hughes cast as a sultry ranch girl named Rio. But it wasn't the plot or the performances that drew the most attention. It was the camera, specifically, how it lingered. Hughes, fascinated with camera optics, reportedly designed a custom bra for Russell to wear during filming, one that would enhance and accentuate her bust on screen. Russell later said she barely wore it, but the idea alone became a Hollywood legend. What truly stirred the censors, however, wasn't the costume, it was how the film was shot. Multiple scenes focused closely on Russell's chest, with long, low-angle shots and lighting that emphasized curves over context. There was no nudity, no overtly sexual behavior, just suggestion. But under the strict Hays Code, suggestion was often more dangerous than depiction. The Production Code Administration objected immediately. They demanded that several scenes, particularly one in which Russell lies on a haystack, speaking softly to a wounded man, be cut or heavily edited. In their view, the framing alone was unacceptably provocative, and the film could not receive approval in its current state. Hughes refused to comply. He shelved the movie, then spent years battling with the censors. He even went as far as personally editing and re-editing the film, cutting seconds at a time, adjusting angles, and resubmitting repeatedly. Still, the code would not bend. Finally, frustrated with the process, Hughes staged a publicity campaign. He leaked rumors about the film's sex appeal, distributed provocative posters, and allowed the controversy to grow. The result? Public curiosity exploded.